Most demons are easy to understand. They bargain, they threaten, they tear things apart. You know what they want. Your soul, your blood, your suffering. It's ugly, yes, but it's simple. But there is one who doesn't follow those rules. One whose name slips through grimoires half erased. One who doesn't come clawing and screaming, but whispering, rewriting. He doesn't want your soul. He wants your story. It starts quietly. No pact carved in flesh, no smoke or fire. Just a thought. An idea that enters your mind like it was always there. A sudden clarity. A solution to a problem that's haunted you for years. A shift in your luck, your health, your talent. Things begin to go right, almost too smoothly. People treat you differently. You remember skills you don't recall learning. And at first, it feels like a blessing. But something is off. Subtle things begin to vanish. You forget how you met someone close to you. A favorite memory feels oddly distant, like it happened to someone else. You hear a voicemail in your own voice, but you don't remember leaving it. In your handwriting, a page appears in your notebook. A phrase repeated over and over, written while you slept. This is better. This is better. This is better. The demon doesn't take your body. He doesn't drag you into fire. Instead, he edits you, gently, slowly, as if correcting a flawed draft. And you never see the red ink until it's too late. Because by the time you notice, you're already someone else. Your story has been revised. The person you were, deleted from memory. Not just your own, but from everyone's. Even the mirror doesn't quite recognize you anymore. This demon doesn't want worship. He wants authorship. He rewrites you not out of malice, but because he believes he can do better. He makes you easier to love, more successful, more confident, more efficient. But in the process, he strips out the parts that made you real. He removes the guilt, the shame, the vulnerability, the messy contradictions. What's left might function better, but it isn't you. And the most horrifying part is this. You agreed to it. You asked for it. You made the deal. You just don't remember doing it. Because that's how the first edit always begins, by erasing the moment it all started. He's not easy to trace. Unlike other demons whose names echo through exorcisms and dusty grimoires, this one appears only in fragments. Footnotes scribbled in margins, ink faded beneath water damage, half-erased entries that refuse to be catalogued. His name changes from text to text, often unpronounceable, often crossed out as if the scribes themselves feared what might come from preserving it. But the pattern remains. The shape of him persists. One of the oldest known references appears in a ruined scroll found beneath a collapsed temple in Anatolia, a record of the one who corrects the flawed, described not as a destroyer, but a sculptor. The passage warns that his presence is not felt through terror, but through adjustment. That the victim does not scream or struggle. They improve. Their lives get better. They become more likable. But they lose something. And they never know what it was. Another reference comes from a burned grimoire unearthed in the ashes of a monastery in southern France. Most of the text was beyond saving, but one surviving line stood out, etched into the inside of the cover in trembling Latin. He writes over us in silence. We thank him as we vanish. No other context, no signature. But the tone was unmistakable, reverence tinged with horror. A more complete account surfaced during the early 1900s in a collection of Middle Eastern mystical writings referred to only as the mirror drafts. Within its pages, the entity is called the ghost editor, a force invoked not by ritual, but by need, desperation, regret. He is said to appear not with a voice, but with influence, not through symbols, but through missing time. Once summoned, he begins to refine the summoner's life. They succeed, they gain, they flourish, and they forget. The scribes who attempted to map his influence all eventually stopped writing. Their final pages are erratic, loops of overwritten thoughts, names struck through, entire paragraphs revised into senseless optimism. As if the very act of studying him allowed him to begin revising them too. One even penned their last words backward, hoping the reversal might stop him. He found me through sorrow. I am no longer who wrote this. His existence has no church, no cult, no clear signs, only echoes. But wherever people wish to be rewritten, wherever they want to erase pain without understanding the cost, he is near. And every mention, no matter how brief, ends the same way, with silence. Not screaming, not fire, just silence, and someone becoming better, until they are gone. He doesn't come to those who worship. He isn't summoned by blood, or chants, or candles flickering in the dark. He doesn't care for ceremony. He waits for something much more common and much more powerful. Despair. Not loud despair either. Not the kind that throws chairs or cries out for help. He listens for the quiet kind. The silent wishing that curls up inside you when you think no one's listening. The words you whisper in your mind when everything feels too heavy. I wish I were different. I wish this wasn't me. That's his invitation. He finds you in moments when you're too tired to carry your own story. When you sit in silence, staring at a blank ceiling or a reflection that no longer feels familiar. He listens to the half-formed thoughts, the ones that begin with "if only" and end with regret. And when he arrives, there's no tremble in the air, no shadow at the door, just a small shift, a subtle pause in your timeline where something changes and you never notice until it's too late. It begins small. You wake up one morning and your chronic ache is gone. That old fear you've always carried, the one that stopped you from speaking up, chasing something, leaving someone. It's not there anymore. You chalk it up to time, maybe healing, maybe luck. But soon after, something else goes missing. A song you used to love suddenly sounds hollow. A nickname a friend once gave you no longer feels like it belongs. You can't quite place what's changed, but something has. He doesn't need an altar. He finds his way in through shame, loneliness, disappointment, the things we try to bury beneath work, noise, and distraction. And once inside, he doesn't ask for your soul. He doesn't threaten you. He just offers help. A quiet offer to make things a little easier, smoother, better. You won't remember accepting. You'll just start waking up in a version of your life that works a little more perfectly and feels a little less like yours. People who've been touched by him don't look cursed. They look successful, peaceful, composed. But there's always a moment, a flicker behind the eyes, a hesitation in their words, like they're trying to recall something just out of reach. Sometimes they pause mid-sentence. Sometimes they forget what they were saying. And sometimes, late at night, they whisper to themselves without realizing it, a single line repeated like a forgotten mantra. This is better. Because that's how he finds you, not with fire, but with a rewrite you begged for, without ever knowing it. There is a moment, though you won't remember it, a moment when the offer is made, not in words, but in understanding. You're not kneeling and he's not looming. There's no contract, no signature, just a thought, one so gentle and agreeable, it feels like your own. Wouldn't it be easier if this part of you didn't exist? And in that moment of weakness, of pain, of longing to be someone else, you agree. And that's when the pact begins. The demon doesn't take everything at once. That's not his style. He's subtle, methodical, more editor than executioner. He removes the things you've marked for deletion, whether consciously or not. That memory of humiliation, gone. The guilt from something you never made peace with, softened, erased. A bad habit, a fear, a buried shame. He smooths them out, polishes you like a manuscript until you barely recognize the flaws that once defined you. And then he starts adding. At first, it's nothing you notice. You wake up with sharper instincts. Your tongue feels quicker, your posture more confident. You speak, and people listen. You feel like the best version of yourself. But along with the changes come gaps. You lose track of time. You forget names. A friend mentions a shared moment, and you nod politely, pretending to remember something that no longer belongs to you. You find journal entries in your own handwriting you don't recall writing. And the worst part, they sound like you, but they're not. Not quite. He gives you what you want most. Success, charm, resilience, even peace. But the cost is memory, identity, the small scars and struggles that made you real. In their place, he leaves something cleaner, more efficient, an improved narrative, a revised draft. And with each revision, the original you fades like a pencil mark beneath layers of ink. No pain, no protest. Just silence where there used to be noise. People who've made the pact don't scream. They don't resist. They adapt. Because the demon doesn't rule through fear. He rules through comfort. He makes life easier. He makes you better. And if occasionally you stare into the mirror and wonder whose eyes are staring back, that's a small price to pay, isn't it? Eventually you forget you ever made the deal. That part is always edited first. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no flash of light, no violent shift. You wake up the same, go about your day, speak to the same people, and yet, piece by piece, something inside you begins to unravel and reform. It starts with the things you stop noticing. You stop feeling anxious in crowds, but you also stop reacting when someone calls your name with urgency. You no longer feel crushed by regret, but you also don't laugh the way you used to. Everything sharp becomes dulled. Everything meaningful becomes muted. People around you sense the difference before you do. They say you've changed, but they struggle to say how. You're more focused, more confident, more polished, but less you. Friends grow distant. Conversations feel rehearsed. The music you once loved feels like background noise, and your favorite stories don't move you anymore. It's as if the parts of you that connected to emotion, the real, chaotic, human parts, are slowly being overwritten by something that values precision over passion. Then the physical changes begin. Not dramatic, not supernatural, just off. A sudden preference for clothes you never used to wear. A way of walking, standing, moving that doesn't quite match the old rhythm of your body. You hear recordings of your voice and it sounds edited, calmer, clearer, void of hesitation. You catch glimpses of yourself in the mirror and feel a strange detachment, as if you're observing a character you've only recently started to inhabit. Your memories become slippery. Childhood fades first, the warm edges of distant summers, the awkward years, the painful lessons. Then come the relationships, slowly rewritten until you remember people not for how they made you feel, but for what they meant in your timeline. Friends become bullet points. Lovers become paragraphs. You flip through your past like a well-organized file, forgetting that it used to be a living, breathing thing. The mess is gone. So is the meaning. And the worst part is, you're still functional. You're thriving even. You ace the job interview. You charm strangers. You're more articulate than ever before. But deep down, a question lingers. Not loud, but persistent. Wasn't there more to me than this? And when you try to answer, the thought slips away, as if your own mind is now a red pen crossing out what no longer fits. That's the demon's power. He doesn't destroy who you were. He revises you until that person simply doesn't make sense anymore. Until you're the version of yourself the world prefers. Clean, contained, efficient. And when there's no one left to ask what was lost, there's nothing left to grieve. Just a quiet, comfortable existence in a life you never truly wrote. Because the greatest horror isn't becoming someone else. It's forgetting you ever were someone else at all. Not everyone who makes the deal remembers it. In fact, almost no one does. That's part of the design, part of the magic. He removes the moment of choice first, so you never know when the rewriting began. But if you look closely, if you really examine the oddities in your life that you've brushed off as coincidence or fatigue, you might start to see the seams in your story. You might realize the edits have already begun. Have you ever found yourself in a place that should be familiar, yet feels entirely alien? A room you've entered hundreds of times, suddenly wrong in its silence, its angles just slightly off. Or perhaps someone greets you like an old friend, calls you by a name only a few people ever used, and you smile along, not remembering who they are, but pretending you do, because the alternative is too strange to confront. Déjà vu becomes frequent. Not the usual passing glitch, but prolonged, uncomfortable episodes where you're certain you've lived through something before. Not once, but several times. You start noticing handwriting in your own journals that doesn't match your style. Messages written in your voice, but with phrasing you've never used. Passwords you don't recall setting, ideas you don't remember having, dreams that feel like memories, and memories that feel like dreams. Photos are another clue. Look closely at old pictures. Do you remember taking them? Or do they feel staged, like moments you were inserted into after the fact? Some people report finding entire folders of images on their phones that they swear were never there before. In a few, they're smiling next to people they can't name, wearing clothes they don't own. One person even described a childhood photo they found online of themselves, aged 8, doing something they never remember doing in a place they've never been. Then there are the slips, the little failures of continuity. Someone references a conversation you don't remember, a project you completed that you don't recall starting. You brush it off as stress or lack of sleep, but deep down, it bothers you. You feel like a passenger in your own life, riding in a car that's headed in the right direction, but on a route you didn't choose. And perhaps the most chilling sign of all, the mirror. Some people report subtle delays in their reflection, a blink that's a fraction of a second late, a twitch that doesn't match your body, a smile that feels too rehearsed. You tell yourself it's paranoia, a trick of the mind, but the feeling lingers. That what's looking back isn't copying you. It's watching, waiting. These aren't coincidences, they're edits. And once you start seeing them, it means the original version of you is already being phased out, slowly, quietly, without resistance. Because that's the demon's genius. He doesn't take what you protect. He takes what you're willing to forget. Every pact has a condition, a fine print clause buried deep in the agreement, the kind that only matters after the ink has dried. With most demons, the rules are known. Don't speak the name, don't break the circle, don't look back. But this one is different. His rule is not written, it's not whispered, it's not passed down in warnings or inscribed in forgotten books. It's hidden in silence, embedded so deeply in the trade that you forget it as soon as the deal is struck. But the rule exists, and it is this: you must never try to remember who you were. That's the cost. That's the thread that holds the rewrite together. The moment you begin to pull on it, to question the shifts in your life, to dig through the altered memories, to search for your original self, the structure begins to tear. But it doesn't fall apart cleanly. The more you remember, the more unstable things become. Not just around you, inside you. People who break this rule often describe sudden headaches, flashes of emotion with no source, fragmented memories overlapping like transparent film. You might remember two different versions of the same day. You might dream in voices that don't belong to you. One man reported standing in front of a mirror and seeing his face glitch, flicker between two identities like a corrupted video feed. He screamed. Then he forgot what he saw. That was the mercy, the last edit. Because the demon doesn't erase you out of cruelty. He does it for control. Once rewritten, you are stable, predictable, useful. But the original version of you, the one full of contradictions, doubt, love, fear, fire, that version is volatile. And if it resurfaces, if it starts to claw its way back, the system destabilizes. And so the rule must be upheld. Never remember. Those who try anyway often disappear in more ways than one. Some vanish entirely. Friends wake to find them gone, their names scrubbed from phones and photos like they were never there. Others remain physically, but hollowed, repeating lines they don't understand, smiling without reason, eyes flicking from side to side as if trying to catch something just outside of view. The worst fate, though, belongs to those who remember just enough. Not everything, just fragments. They walk through life half aware, tormented by a sense that something is wrong, that they are wrong, but unable to fix it. These are the broken drafts, never accepted, never erased, just abandoned between versions. And if you're hearing this story and feel a chill deep in your bones, if something in you whispers that maybe, just maybe, this all sounds too familiar, then I'll say this gently. Be careful. Because curiosity is the beginning of memory, and memory is how the story unravels. They rarely speak openly. Most don't even know what's happened to them. But if you search hard enough, if you dig through abandoned blogs, old message boards, audio journals deleted and re-uploaded by strangers, you'll find them. The rewritten. Not confessions, not testimonies, just fragments. Scraps of something remembered that shouldn't have been. There's the story of Nell, a once successful artist who vanished from the public eye for nearly a year. When she resurfaced, her style had changed completely. She no longer recognized her own early work, claiming it looked too emotional, too alive. In a podcast interview she later requested to have removed, she admitted to finding old paintings in her attic that she couldn't recall making. One in particular terrified her. A self-portrait with no eyes, just smooth, unbroken skin where they should have been. "I think that's when I stopped seeing myself," she whispered. The interview was pulled offline 2 days later. Another case comes from a man who went by the username Last Draft. He claimed he had no memory of his childhood, not due to trauma or illness, but because it was revised out. His blog entries were written in cold, clinical language until one post shifted dramatically in tone, filled with fragmented sentences, emotional outbursts, and the repeated line, "I didn't ask to be fixed." That was his final post. Visitors to the blog now find nothing but a blank page. One of the most unsettling stories is from a woman who began to suspect her husband was no longer the man she married. She said he was still kind, still present, but something was missing. He had stopped referencing key moments in their shared past. He seemed unfamiliar with jokes they'd told for years. Eventually she confronted him, and he smiled in that perfect, practiced way and said, "I'm the version of me that deserves you." She left the house that night. When she returned, he was gone. There was no record of him ever having lived there, not even in her phone. All that remained was a folded sheet of paper on the kitchen table that read, "This version is complete." Some stories don't end in disappearance, some end in collapse. A young woman who tried to reverse the rewrite through memory regression therapy began to experience violent mental breaks. Her journals became erratic, filled with contradictory timelines and entries signed with names she didn't recognize. She claimed her dreams were being edited in real time by a version of herself she couldn't stop. Her final recorded words, "I can't tell which me is writing this anymore." They aren't all gone. Some are still walking among us, clean, functional, smiling faces that pass you on the street. People who laugh at the right moments, remember the right things, and feel just a little too perfect. They're the ones who never asked why everything suddenly started working. The ones who never tried to remember the mess they used to be. Because remembering isn't freedom, it's rejection. And most people don't survive the story when they try to write it back in. By now you might be wondering if this is just a story, a modern myth stitched together from fear, folklore, and imagination. That would be comforting, wouldn't it? To believe this demon is only fiction. That you are exactly who you've always been. That the moments of confusion, the forgotten details, the flickers in the mirror are nothing more than stress or sleep deprivation. But stories don't linger in our bones unless some part of them is true. And deep down, you know something isn't quite right. Think back. Can you remember who you were 5 years ago? Not just in vague snapshots, but with clarity. Can you trace how you got here, detail by detail, without gaps? Do your memories feel solid, lived in, real? Or are there pieces missing? Moments that feel like they happened to someone else? People you've lost touch with, who seem almost unreal in hindsight? Entire days that feel like they've been softly erased? The demon doesn't take what you notice. He takes what you're willing to overlook. And his best work is done when you think nothing has changed. You're not supposed to remember the moment you made the deal. That's the first thing he rewrites. The page where the ink dries and your story shifts into his hands. So now ask yourself, not out of fear, but out of caution. If you can't remember the deal, does that mean you never made it? Or does it mean he's already rewritten that part of you? Because the people who never question it, they're the ones he finishes. The ones who smile too easily, who never stammer, never pause, never look back. The ones who no longer wonder what they lost, because the wondering has already been removed. And if your reflection feels a little off tonight, if your memories feel like borrowed pages, if the thought of this story feels too familiar, then maybe your edit has already begun. Let me know in the comments. Would you make the deal if it meant becoming everything you ever wanted to be? Or would you fight to keep the mess, the chaos, the real version of yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your theories, your memories. And if this story left a mark, like something written just beneath your skin, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more forbidden truths from the shadows. Because stories are never really finished. They're just waiting for the next revision.